Hello, this is Dawn Peterson, and this presentation is using imagery in a website, creating a pleasurable user experience with high-quality, ethical image selection and placement. So my first topic is sourcing imagery. This is about finding just the right images for your website project. It can take time, it takes skill, and it can take a discerning eye. So I'm going to give you some guidelines to help you out. Number one, what criteria should you use to select images? So let's say you've got a picture in mind for a web page or a blog post. You've got to decide, is this really going to be a good choice? First item of criteria is it relevant? Is it going to resonate with the personality you're striving to portray with your design? And is the image that you're considering really cool but maybe irrelevant to your message? So I have an example. Let's say you like manga drawings and you want to use them on a website project, but are they really going to work for the business that you're doing or the message that you're trying to communicate? If not, don't use it. Only use it if that spirit of the manga is part of your branding message somehow. Second criteria, is it interesting? So if you want something that is interesting, you might want to avoid something that's a little bit too cliche. For example, we always see the image of an apple used with education. If you're going to use that kind of visual metaphor to represent education, try to find a new spin on it. Find an image of an apple that's still really interesting and novel, a new way to look at an apple. Because sometimes the relevance of our image should take a back seat to finding something that's truly interesting. It's still an important criterion, but it's not as important as getting somebody's attention. There are a couple of websites here I want to show you that I think do really great illustrations, and the illustrations aren't immediately relevant to what they sell, but they certainly are interesting. This is thinkgeek.com. And they have a very recognizable illustration style. Their mascot is this little monkey here. And this month they're going with a Star Wars theme, but it's not the typical sort of Star Wars illustrations that you might find. Instead, what they've done is like homemade Star Wars toys. If you look down at the bottom here, they have this great illustration with snow falling, of a monkey and a dog all dressed up in Star Wars sorts of things, but they look like they're pretty well homemade sorts of objects, not the sorts of things that you would actually buy at thinkgeek.com. The second site is Tijuana Flats, which is a restaurant, and they have a pretty clear hand-drawn sort of illustration style here. It's pretty obvious to me who they're going after in terms of their target audience. They're probably going after a younger crowd that's interested in having fun. And you can see these quirky little colorful, playful images here on their manifesto, which not too many restaurants have, that's really going to appeal to that target market, even if it doesn't directly have anything to do with food. Our third criteria is it appealing? Well, because beauty is in the eye of the beholder, you need to start thinking about your target audience. What can you select or create that is aesthetically and emotionally pleasing to them? Because appealing images are really important for college websites. We're trying to get people to come to our college, and if it seems dull, old-fashioned, sloppy, potential students may avoid applying for us or interacting with the website at all. So make sure that the image that you've chosen is of high quality visually, and it adds to the visual hierarchy and balance of your page layout. And we have another tutorial on page layout. Make sure that the image you've chosen avoids undesirable symbology. The following sites include some really excellent college photography. Arizona State University has a beautiful website with photography that is well lit. It's got a lot of excitement. The focus is on the students. the culture of the campus, the environment around the campus. It's all very appealing photography. James Madison University likewise has really beautiful photographs on their website. Very appealing, focus on the student experience, and pretty well color coordinated with the purple and yellow theme of the site. Now, there are some copyright issues that surround the selection of imagery for websites. In the United States and most of the world, copyright is conferred on an individual the moment the camera shutter is clicked or a piece of artwork is created, what have you. So never assume that you have permission to use an image if you find it on Google, because copyright holders usually retain the rights to their images and all derivative work. There's a misconception out there that if you change it by a certain percentage that you can go ahead and use it and republish it, but you will find yourself in court perhaps if you do that. I have some case studies. Case study number 1, the monkey. David Slater was a photographer who set out his camera with a remote trigger in a jungle, and the trigger was within reach of a macaque monkey when he was in Indonesia. And the monkey took a hold of that trigger and took a series of selfies with the camera, and a few of those pictures turned out pretty remarkable. Slater has tried to claim copyright to the images. Some of the images showed up on Wikipedia, some of them showed up on other people's websites, and ultimately, the U.S. Copyright Office has stated that because the monkey clicked the shutter, the monkey is the one that took the photos, it's not a human, and therefore the photos are not subject to copyright. In case study number 2, Hope, Shepard Fairey designed this very recognizable poster on the right-hand side in support of Barack Obama, and he sold hundreds of copies on the streets of New York, and the image went viral online. Unfortunately, the graphic was proved to be a derivative. It was originally based on a photograph by Manny Garci, who worked for the Associated Press as a photographer, and Fairey had to settle out of court for an undisclosed amount of money. Okay, sources for your images. There are a lot of options out there. Number 1, make your own. Maybe you have the skill and inclination to create photography or illustrations, drawings for your site, and these original works of art can be very appealing. It's the best way to make sure that the imagery on your site is completely original and it won't be found elsewhere. But, a website could require a great deal of this. A lot of illustration in the form of icons, buttons, backgrounds, drawings, logos, etc. If a single designer creates all of these, they all tend to have a feel to them that is consistent. The illustrator or you can create a specific design motif and a color palette that it all fits together. The following site does something like that. They have a specific color palette, and all the illustrations are clearly all drawn by the same person. Sewitall.com is owned by Alicia Pucci, and she is in San Francisco. She has sewing classes in her home, and you can see the very distinct color palette of the pinks and greens and golds, and the illustrations just have a certain sort of style to them. Pincushion here, the thread, and the portrait of her done in a cartoon style. Everything just works together. A next image source is stock photography. If you don't want to make it yourself, well, there are millions of images online that are available for purchase. Some of them are even for free. So your next stop might be a stock photo archive. Image archives can consist not only of photos, but illustrations, videos, etc., and typically are created for multiple multi-client use rather than a single use for a single project. Now, you need to track down and understand the licensing of the image that you've chosen and the image usage guidelines associated with it. So you may find an image that Google Images is telling you is available without license, but you still have to use some sort of attribution to the originator of the artwork. So high quality photos of people can run a lot more money because a person is photographed, they may have been paid, they have to sign a model release, etc. For free images, you can go to an archive at stock.exchange or XCHNG. They have a very large database of images. You're going to have a lot more options at larger databases of free stock photography. However, the average quality of these images at free sites is not going to be as good as the images that you pay for. And even on the free stock sites, there may be requirements that you post attribution to the creator. There's an article here called 14 Amazingly Free Stock Photo Websites, and you can find that link on the page or description below. The next type of stock photography is called rights managed images. Rights managed, these are going to be very carefully controlled by the stock company. When the image is rights managed, you're charged according to a few factors: the size of your business, the number of people that may be exposed to the image in your campaign, and the amount of time for which the image will be in use. These are quite a bit pricier than the royalty-free images. They are going to possibly be thousands of dollars instead of $10 to $30. This level of management does mean it's very unlikely your competitor is going to be using the same image as you, which is why a lot of people like the rights managed images, so that they are the only one that are showing that particular image on a billboard, for example. And the photos in a rights managed collection are almost always done by professional photographers and illustrators. Here are some of the rights managed collections. There's Getty Images. There's one called Master File and another called Corbis Images. Another source of images would be outsourcing. You could hire a photographer. You want to make sure that you pick a photographer who has experience with the type of shots that you're after. Doing commercial photography for a college, for example. Or if you're doing a food blog, you'd want to choose somebody who really knew how to photograph food. There's special techniques and angles and things like that that photographers in a certain area would be familiar with. The best way to find a photographer is by word of mouth, but you can also start at the American Photographic Artists website. If you are going to outsource your photography to a professional photographer, make sure you get everything in writing before a shoot. You want to provide them with details of each shot that is needed, where and when you'd like the photos taken. They need to be very clear on what their pricing is, and you both need to make sure that if you have any models in your photographs, that the models sign releases that allow you to use those photographs. For illustration, as you saw in a couple of the websites I showed you, this professional illustration can really enhance the personality of a website. Also, you see on Google a lot, there are the Google Doodles that really set a personality for Google and make it appealing to people. I have an article that's available on the slide deck called 40 Excellent Illustrations in Web Designs. You want to make sure that you decide what kind of style and personality you need your illustrations on, and choose an illustrator that is already very comfortable with that style. If you need to hire a professional illustrator, there is a website called Hire an Illustrator. And I can illustrate for your site too. I've got a lot of experience doing illustrations, so just let me know. Dawn Peterson. Some bad habits to avoid. Google ganking refers to finding an image on Google Images and downloading it and then uploading it to your own website. Well, you're not allowed to do that. Even if you do some derivations, as I mentioned, the original copyright owner still owns that copyright protection. So anyway, this is called Google ganking. If there's something you absolutely have to have, you've got to do your best to find the copyright owner and ask their permission. If you cannot get that permission, you are not allowed to use it. You could receive a cease and desist letter if you ignore this warning. Even on Flickr, Flickr often will provide photos by the photographers that you can use, but you've got to understand the licensing. Most of the Flickr images are going to at least require attribution. Another bad habit is called hotlinking. This is even worse than Google ganking because you are hotlinking directly to the image on its original server. Not only are you republishing it on your own site, but you're hogging bandwidth from the owner's own web servers. It adds insult to injury. Here's an example of what it looks like in the code if you're doing hotlinking. This is a typical image tag where it's showing that the code is looking directly within your own website inside the images folder and then for a file called chipmunk.jpg. But hotlinking looks like this. It starts with http://:/ and then goes out to somebody else's site to go find that image. Because you're doing this, you are stealing resources from somebody else's web host and therefore from them. Here's an example of the oatmeal.com getting back at huffingtonpost.com for hotlinking. You can see that Huffington Post Comedy tried to hotlink or embed the Oatmeal's comic strip right into their own page. And there are some clever tricks that you can do to replace that image with another image if somebody hotlinks to it. So, dear Huffington Post, please don't hotlink images without permission. It costs me money to host these. Here's my monthly bill. Thanks. Another bad habit to avoid, honestly, is clipart. Now, there are many websites out there that provide free or cheap clipart and illustration packages, but unless you have a really good eye for this stuff, it's easy to pick clipart that just generally looks too goofy or it's overused and generally unprofessional for a serious design project. So leave them for company internal newsletters. Wait, don't even use them there either. If you're using clipart on a website, it's like serving instant mashed potatoes at a 5-star restaurant. Instead, your imagery should be original, appropriate, and astonishing. Okay, a few how-tos on the WordPress media library. This is an overview of what the media library looks like. If you just go directly to it, you can see I've selected media on the left-hand side of the dashboard area. But typically, we're going to be working with the media library from the edit page screen. So here is just one corner of the area where we're editing the page, and we would click on that Add Media button, which you can find right here. And it takes you to something that looks a little bit different. This is the Insert Media panel. You can see all of the pictures that have already been uploaded because this defaults to the Media Library tab. But there's also the Upload Files tab that's to the left of that. For every image that's uploaded, you want to make sure to put in your alt attribute. It's labeled as alt text for the individual picture in the media library. Now, this text is really important for the visually impaired because they are probably using a screen reader, which is a type of software that vocalizes all of the content on a web page to them. And when it comes across a picture, it's going to look for this alt text to describe to the person what that content is. If you don't put alt text here, they don't have accessibility to that photograph or other image. Below that is a subpanel for the display settings. If you're going to insert it onto your page, your blog post, you can choose which alignment. Generally, I leave it set to none, but you could choose left or right. You could link it to itself. Let's say you're putting in a smaller version of it here. You can have it linked to the larger version so that people can click to enlarge the image. And you can pick a size down here. If it's not very large, you'll probably see that it says actual size, but you could also choose a thumbnail, which is cropped to 150 by 150, or medium, where the largest dimension is 300 pixels, or large, where the largest dimension is 625 pixels. Back on your edit page, on the far right-hand column, all the way down, there's a subpanel for featured image. This is only available for posts, like blog posts, news items, and for events only. This will display on the page for either of those two items. We also have a plugin in place that will allow you to replace or edit images. So if you have your picture pulled up in the media library, you have the choice of editing the original, which will allow you to crop or rotate or flip a number of things here, or click replace. And when you click replace, you'll see this panel come up on the right hand side, and you click here again to upload a new file. Okay, using imagery in web design. Even if you've done a really, really outstanding job in selecting the images for your design, you also need to consider their presentation. The presentation will depend on the constraints of the layout you've chosen. As I mentioned, our medium-sized pictures are 300 pixels across or tall, and our large pictures are 625. You have to think about things like bullet points that might be floating alongside of them, or other images that are around, headlines. There's a number of things that might confound your presentation. You also need to remember how the image is going to appear on mobile devices. And for that reason, we also want to make sure that the image is not a really large file size before you upload it. If you have something like Photoshop, or you can find an online image optimizer, that can reduce the file size while retaining the quality for your image. So it's up to you to determine how your image will be cropped or color corrected before it's uploaded, if the image will have any framing or borders, and what type of visual effects will be applied to the image, if any. Now, these are all going to happen in some image editing program before upload. You always want to begin with the highest resolution image you can obtain before making your edits in Photoshop. I recommend you get comfortable with Photoshop if you're going to be working with images a lot, so you can make the images that appear on your website as stunning as they can be. You can get a really good start on working with Photoshop at this web address, helpx.adobe.com/photoshop/tutorials.html. Editing your images. Just a few thoughts. This is not a really thorough survey here of image editing, but just some thoughts for best practices in things like creative cropping. Some of the most profound impacts you can make on the presentation of your image will be from choosing what should be included and what should not. And this is called cropping if you're taking and cutting out part of the picture. Cropping can eliminate unnecessary or distracting details. So I have a case study here of a photograph that I found on a professional website, but somebody had just snapped it from probably from their phone, and uploaded it exactly as is to their website. Well, it's got some perspective issues. It's got some cars in the background that are distracting. So here's what I did in Photoshop. I copied the image to a new layer. I pulled out a few guides, as you can see in these cyan lines here, or turquoise. And then I went to the menu and chose Edit, Transform, Distort, and I pull the corners out here, which actually straightens the image. Now I know what my straight verticals are here and horizontals. I know how to undistort the picture. Because some of the top of the house had been lost in my distortion, I went to Image and then Canvas Size and gave it, maybe another 100 pixels at the top so that it had enough room there. I ran the transform command again to just get it really squeaked into place, and also make the house taller because it had gotten looking a bit shorter in my previous undistortion. And you can see in this crop example, I am cutting out most of the cars on the left and some of the house on the right. And now when you see them side by side, I hope you can see that the one on the right is preferable. It has better focus on the house. There's still some perspective issues, some kind of fisheye lens stuff that was happening along the roof line here. So if I really wanted to spend a lot of time on this image here, I could make this perfectly straight. Cropping can also increase the emotional impact of a photo. So you can see here, this is a photo of giraffes I took in San Francisco Zoo, and if you just crop in there to the mother and the baby, it feels more warm and fuzzy. Lighting and color. If you're not using the most expensive equipment, sometimes it's hard to get quality lighting and color in your photographs. I take a lot of pictures with my camera on my phone, and sometimes I have to do some lighting and color correction afterwards. Even the professional photographers have to do some lighting and color corrections most of the time. So try to get the best composition and lighting before you take your shot, and you'll have to do less work in Photoshop afterwards. Just about any photo straight out of the camera is going to need some corrections, so let's look at an example here. Here's a typical angled selfie by a tweenager. I rotated it so it's a little more pleasing angle. I cropped to put focus on her face instead of the details of her background. I use the blur tool because there's a lot of noise caused by low light levels. That noise is referring to kind of aberrant color pixels that show up in her skin. And overall, I lightened everything, so it looked like her face got a lot more light. Here I did a lot of the same things. I cropped in to my son and my husband. I poured a lot more light into the scene. Photoshop's pretty good at that. Okay, we need to take a look at the kinds of file formats that are used on the web. These are the most common ones. Once you have your Photoshop file completed, you're going to need to save that image for the web. So it's going to help if you understand which types of file formats are more appropriate for which types of images. GIF. GIF is an 8-bit format, supports a maximum of 256 individual colors for a given file. Basically what that means is you don't have a whole lot of colors to work with. It could choose 256 from all of the millions of possible colors, but it can only have 256. For this reason, GIF is really bad choice for photographs. Photographs tend to have millions of colors, or at least tens of thousands. 256 is nowhere near that. So instead, GIF is really ideal for graphics that are composed of areas of solid color, such as logos. Here, for example, on the left-hand side is Starbucks logo. It's black, it's white, it's green. It can be really well dealt with a GIF file format. GIFs also display transparency, but it's all or nothing. You either get 100% transparent for a single pixel or 100% of a given color. As you can see on the right-hand side there, GIF can also support animations, but notice it is going to be limited in color because for all of the frames, individual frames of this animated GIF, that all together they can only use 256 colors. JPEG. This is designed for photographic images. It can handle almost 16.8 million colors, so it's going to do well for your photos. But there are some drawbacks. JPEG is a lossy format. What that refers to is the data compression, that when the file is saved as a JPEG, it's throwing away data. Most of it is data that's not visual, but some of it is. So the quality of the picture depends on how much you compress that file. JPEG's very flexible like that. You can see in the upper left-hand corner here, this is the original photo. This is the JPEG saved with a high quality, and over here, well, there's medium, and then this is the very low quality. You can see these blocks start to show up here, and it's kind of giving away the fact that JPEG saves its data one block at a time. Ping file format. It's just fun to say. It comes in two flavors. There's 8-bit and there's 24-bit. The 8-bit is like GIF, so it's only going to allow 256 colors. 24-bit means 8 bits per channel. So 8 bits for red, 8 bits for green, 8 bits for blue. That's why it's called 24-bit. That 24-bit ping is going to work much like the JPEG, that it can handle 16.8 million colors. Now, ping can result in much higher file sizes because it does not have lossy compression. It does have compression, but it's not lossy, so it doesn't throw away visual data at all. That means there's a lot more data stored in the file. So here's a good example of an image that works really well for ping. It looks at first like it's got simple color, but it actually has really complex color because each of these panels in the Windows logo has a gradient that goes through quite a bit of color, and there's a gradient in the sphere shape behind it, etc. So this actually requires far more than 256 colors. And it also, because we're using ping here, avoids the kind of artifacting, which is like the noise and crap that gets thrown into the picture by JPEGs. And finally, ping can support variable transparency. So as opposed to the GIF, which only has invariable transparency, a pixel is either 100% transparent or 100% a color, which you see here. It's either pure white or pure pink or pure burgundy. On the right-hand side, the ping transparency is partial. You can see through it to this checkerboard that's like the very background of Photoshop. Have fun adding images to your sites, and let me know if you need help with anything. I'm Dawn Peterson, and I'm your webmaster. Thank you.